Greetings, my name is Blaze, and I play Marvel Future Fight, obviously. And I also stream it on Twitch, so check me out on Twitch sometime, and remember to thumb up, like, and subscribe, and leave your comments below if you'd like to see more videos like this. So today's topic is support characters, and their role in Marvel Future Fight. Now, talking to newer players, folks that jump in the stream sometime, or just talking in general in chats on other people's Twitches as well, I notice a lot of folks don't really understand what characters are support characters or how to utilize them. And it seems a lot of folks don't realize how many support characters are actually in Marvel Future Fight. So what I decided to do is I decided to go through and make my own list of support characters. With the support characters, I've broken them into two main lists. The first list is the true support characters. The other one are the conditional support characters. And what I mean by that is the true supports are going to have like universal bumps to like against all supervillains, extra damage, for example, or critical rate for like all allies and things like that, where the conditional supports are more like elemental damage increases. So it's not necessarily a condition that you would use on every team or as universal. Then I also broke that down into when the support ability applies. So in some situations, it's going to be a situational true support. So it's only going to apply to hero allies, even though it's bumping supervillain damage and decreasing supervillain damage. Same thing with the conditional thing. Sometimes it'll, work in certain circumstances, but it's only going to apply to a specific group of characters, such as the Warriors of the Sky. So what I'm going to do to make this easier on folks that don't want to sit through everything is I'm going to start with two big lists that I made. And it's going to show all of the support characters, including the subgroup, and then all of the conditional support characters, including the subgroup. And then I've put on each of these lists either a U if the uniform is required for the support ability, or a UO for uniform is optional, saying that the uniform will augment the ability, but it's not necessarily required. Then if a character has a tier 2 icon over their face, that means they need to be tier 2 because it's their tier 2 ability, their tier 2 passive that gives them the support. So if they don't have a tier 2 next to their face on their icon, then that means they don't necessarily need to be tier 2 to still be used as a support character. The other thing I want to point out is as we're talking about this, let's make sure we're on the same page of what I consider support so that we understand what we're talking about. I'm considering a support a character that can be in any position on a team and still augment that team with their abilities. So I'm not talking about team bonuses, and I'm not talking about leadership. I am only talking about characters that apply some sort of augmentation, some sort of buff to their teammates by being on the team. So without further ado, let's talk about the true supports first. Here's a list of the true supports. Now, you'll see across the top here, these are the characters that I consider to be true supports, and these are the ones that a lot of folks will typically talk about. So to begin with, we have Mystique. Now, Mystique has to have her tier 2 because it's her tier 2 passive ability. It's that passive that's on the character that is going to give all allies superhero damage of 45% boost and supervillain damage of 40% boost. Colossus, he needs his uniform. He does not need his tier 2, but he's going to give all allies decrease reflect 60%, reflect physical, superhero, and supervillain decrease damage to your team by 50%. Valkyrie needs her tier 2. She's going to apply her ability to all allies again. It's going to increase supervillain damage by 45% and decrease damage from supervillains by 15%. Shuri, she needs her tier 2. Uniform is optional. She is going to apply it to all allies. She's going to increase damage to supervillains by 45%, decrease from supervillains by 35%. And then there is Ghost Panther, who does need his tier 2. He doesn't have a uniform. And his is sort of, it almost went into conditional support because his tier 2 passive is going to apply to all allies, but it's going to give 50% increase for fire damage. But on top of that, he also does the supervillain 45% increased damage and decrease supervillain by 15%. Now, the rest of the characters I will just briefly talk about, so we don't spend too much time on this. If you want to go further ahead in the video, I'll actually open each of the characters and show you the text so that you can read it. The true support hero allies. So Phil Coulson, Nick Fury, and Wave all have support abilities. They're all tier 2 abilities. Nick Fury has optional uniform. Even though Phil Coulson has a uniform, I don't see it affecting his ability for his support ability at all. But they only apply to hero allies. So if you use them on a team that doesn't have heroes, it's not doing anything for them. This will not help any of the villains. White Fox is a special conditional character, and I am actually going to open her up right now, because even though she's a true support, she only affects leadership allies, and a lot of people don't understand what this means. So let's go back really quick to the character list. I'm going to come down here to White Fox. All right, so White Fox here, if I go to the skills, again, we're talking about passive skills. This is little 2 icon here means Roman numeral 2. That means she has to have her tier 2 to have this passive. Every character has 2 passives. But her tier 2, look what it says specifically. Allies with leadership. Increase damage dealt to supervillain type characters by 60%. So a lot of people don't know what that means. Does that mean they have to be in a leadership position? Does that mean they have to have a leadership skill? Well, everyone has a leadership skill. So how does that work? It is only going to apply to characters who have the leadership shield icon. Some example of those characters are Spider-Man. So if I go to Spider-Man here and I go to the details page, you'll see this little shield icon. If I left click, you'll see here leadership. If they have this shield icon, which looks like Captain America's shield, and it says leadership, having White Fox on the team will increase Spider-Man's damage by 60%. Other characters, I'm not going to name all of them right now, but another example would be Sharon Rogers. Again, leadership. Another example would be Professor Xavier. Again, leadership. So just look for that shield icon. If they have that shield icon and it says leadership, then White Fox's ability will apply to them. Now let's go to the secondary list. These are the conditional supports. This top group will apply to all allies. The bottom group, including Taskmaster, is a situational conditional. So this top list here, Ancient One needs her tier 2, Storm, Cyclops with the optional uniform buff, Beast needs his tier 2, Weapon Hex, Archangel or Angel, Groot needs his tier 2, Warwolf needs his tier 2, Invisible Woman, Mantis needs her tier 2, Ulysses Claw, Wasp needs her tier 2, Wasp Van Dyke, Wiccan needs his tier 2, Ghost needs his tier 2, Ronan needs his tier 2. Ghost actually needs a uniform. If Ghost does not have the uniform, if it is the male version of Ghost, then it only applies to supervillains. So you do need the uniform for it to be applying to everyone, but the non-uniform Ghost still has the buff. Victorious and Taskmaster. Now, Taskmaster is interesting. He has a conditional tier 2 buff for Weapon Master characters. However, he also has a passive that will give guaranteed true dodge of 40% for anyone whose hit points drop below 50%. And Cynic Alex, this is a shout out to Cynic Alex, discovered that that applies to the whole team, even though it doesn't say it in the text. But again, when we open up each of these characters, we can go into more details later. Another conditional support that's situational is Volstagg. Volstagg has a support ability that only applies to heroes. Thing has a Fantastic Four allies only support ability, which of course is his tier 2. And then Sunbird and Shadow Shell have conditional supports that only applies to Warriors of the Sky. So that was it as far as the list goes. So anyone who is not interested in the specific or details obviously can stop the video here. However, I wouldn't mind you continuing to watch and, give me some more view time and thumb up, like, subscribe, hint, hint. But let's go ahead and actually open each of these characters and talk about those support abilities and where you find them and what we're talking about here. So to begin with, we're going to go to the full character list. We're going to go ahead and use the search because it makes it easier. So we're going to look at Mystique first. We're going to go through the list on all the characters one at a time. So the first character on our list is Mystique. So again, we're going to go to skills for all of these, and we're going to go to the passives. There's 2 passives. If it says self or if it says applies to enemies, we're not counting those. We're looking at the ones that is going to apply to allies of some form. So Mystique's Tier 2 passive that applies to all allies. Here you go. Superhero and supervillain increase damage 45 and 40% here. Now we mentioned that Colossus doesn't need his Tier 2 because his Tier 2 is for himself. Down here he has a passive Piot's Will, which is all allies. Decreases the effect of Reflect by 60%. Reflect effect of physical. Decreases damage received from superheroes and supervillains by 50%. Valkyrie applies to all allies. Increases damage to supervillains by 45 and decreases from supervillains by 15. Shuri, she's actually better with her uniform. I do recommend her uniform. Applies to all allies. Increases damage dealt to supervillain types by 45. Decreases damage from supervillains by 35. Does need her Tier 2. If you are to take off her uniform, by the way, and equip her normal uniform, you will notice here that she still has it, but it does decrease the amount. So in some cases, it is better for the uniform, but it's not required. She'll still have it without the uniform. Ghost Panther is an example of a character that both has leadership and support abilities in the passive, but does need to be Tier 2, applies to all allies, fire damage by 50%, supervillain damage by 45, and decreased damage from supervillains by 15. Keep in mind with these characters that we just talked about here that it is better for World Boss Ultimate villains. Also in Alliance Conquest or in Timeline, if you're against villains, this is going to help, but this isn't going to do anything against heroes. Phil Coulson's considered one of the better supports in the game. Honestly, Shuri's stats are pretty high too, but this increased guaranteed critical rate by 20% is awesome. Supervillains 45, decreased supervillains 15, only to heroes, so this only works with hero allies. Nick Fury is another one of those characters with the uniform gives a small bump, but again, only heroes. Super armor all defenses by 30%, immunity to incapacitation, increases damage dealt to supervillains by 55%. And this is just the support. He's another character that has leadership as well, so those do stack. We already talked about White Fox and gave some examples. It has to be an ally that actually has the leadership ability under their details page, but it will increase damage to supervillains by 60%. That takes care of all of the true support characters. So let's talk about some of these conditional support characters, which some of you may be wondering about. Ancient One. This applies to all allies. This is her Tier 2 passive. Ignore target's dodge by 25% and increase damage to all elemental damage by 25%. So if you have an elemental character and you're fighting maybe an enemy that's high dodge, great character to use on that team. Storm actually has a passive, but it's not her Tier 2. That's for self. This is why she does not require Tier 2. Down here, I have the Storm. All allies get a 50% chance to become immune to lightning damage, but she also increases lightning damage by 12%. This is great if you're doing an Alliance Conquest and you find you're going up against a Thor or some other lightning character. You can put her on the team to help subdue some of that damage. Cyclops. He has this pretty much with all of his uniforms, but again, it's not his Tier 2. It is his Ambient Radiance, his passive down here, applies to all allies. With this uniform, it gives 30% increase of energy attack. That number changes based upon the uniform you're using. Beast. Applies to all allies. 10% increase of recovery rate, increase guaranteed critical rate by 8%, and decrease all damage received by 15%. Weapon Hex. Applies to all allies. This witchcraft ability will summon an illusion with 50% of the summoner's stats. Activation rate when hit point is below 99%. So you see a little orb that follows your team around if you have Weapon Hex on the team. That's her illusion. And yes, even though that Angel is a removes debuff leader, he also has a passive here that gives all allies 30% increase of recovery rate. So if you have a healer or someone with a recovery CTP or regen CTP, it is going to increase that recovery rate. They're going to heal faster just by him being on the team. Groot has the ability to drop little healing baubles that your character can walk over and get healed from. So it's going to give 20% recovery of max hit points. This is going to apply to all allies, so when they're recovering and stuff, which is actually pretty cool. Werewolf. All allies will get critical damage increased by 30%, increased guaranteed critical rate by 20%. Invisible Woman. She will give to all allies guards against 1 hit with a 2-second cooldown. Mantis. Applies to all allies. Critical damage is increased by 20% and 15% ignore defense. Wiccan. All allies. Ignore target's dodge rate by 20% and 1 second increase to the duration of snare and pierce against enemies. Electro. Electro, it's actually, I'm sorry, it's not his tier 2, but he has, at the bottom here, you'll notice it says, applies to all allies. Increase lightning damage by 15%. So even though there's a self there, there's also an ally applying to his passive for unstable current. Ghost. All allies, 20% increase of energy attack. Ronin. All allies increase target's dodge rate by 20%. Now, the second part only applies to him, so it's only the ignore target's dodge rate. Victorious. All allies, plus 30% increase of hit points. Taskmaster. The main one, which requires the tier 2, this only applies to Weapon Master allies, so they need to have that crossed gun looking icon. So for example, Deadpool here, if you get to his details page, you see the cross guns, those are Weapon Masters. So anybody with that icon, this will apply to. Another example would be Cable, of course. A real easy way to see what symbol they have is when you are picking for World Boss Ultimate, they'll have the symbols next to them. See, this is a character who would also benefit from White Fox because they have leadership and the Weapon Master. So you could use White Fox and Weapon Master with Cable, and it's going to amplify him and his damage output, which is pretty sweet. The other thing about Taskmaster is this passive Absolute Dodge. Now, it does say applies to self, and this is what I was saying, a shout out to Cynic Alex. He noticed that the dodge icon appears for all characters on the team. He'll have them on the team, and he was trying them out against World Boss Ultimate, and they are getting that extra dodge for that 40% there, which is pretty awesome. Volstagg. Hero allies decrease all damage received by 20%. So it only applies to heroes. Fang. This passive only applies to Fantastic Four allies, but they all get 40% increase of all attack, decrease the effect of Reflect by 50%, Reflect effect of physical, and Super Armor, all defenses plus 5% increase. Sunbird. Sunbird, this only applies to Warriors of the Sky allies, but they will revive when dead. Revive with 50% of max hit points. So you know how when Jean dies, she comes back to life? If he's on the team and it's a Warriors of the Sky, so we're talking about like Blue Dragon or Tiger or Shadow Shell, whatever the case may be, if any of them die, they come back to life and get a second life just by him being there, which is pretty cool. So even though other characters have it built in, he'll give it to characters who don't have it if they're Warriors of the Sky. Shadow Shell. Again, applies to Warriors of the Sky allies only. Going to give 50% increase of all defenses and decrease all damage received by 25. So it just makes all the characters tankier, just by her being on the team. Again, only applies to Warriors of the Sky. So there you have it. There is the full list of characters that are support characters in the game. The list is a lot larger than most folks realize, but, you know, it's pretty legit. So consider this when you're building teams for World Boss Ultimate, Alliance Conquest, maybe GBR. Different circumstances and situations to use them, but hopefully you found this list beneficial. Remember to thumb up, like, and subscribe, and thanks again for watching.